episode. Julie and I are here today representing and promoting the Quantum Feminine conference that Lisa Gunshore, host of the Buddhist Biohacker podcast, is hosting at the end of this month. My name is Maddie. I'm the host of Truth Matters podcast. Thank you all for being here and listening today. And Julie, thank you so much for being willing to come on today.
Thank you. I mean, it's a great pleasure and an honor, and I'm really excited because I'm thrilled about the upcoming conference. It's going to be absolutely incredible, and everybody that's asking about it and engaged with it is already feeling the energy of it. So that really says something.
Absolutely, it really, really does. The conference is going to be a 3-day event on Zoom, the 29th, 30th, and 31st of October, and we will list all the information as to how to register in the show notes, and registration is free. So this really is an incredible event, and all of these women are serving and offering their gifts and talents to help inspire and uplift everyone. So it's going to be really great.
Yes. And I do want to say as well, obviously people get, we have busy lives. So if anyone cannot make the lives, then the recordings are always available afterwards. And they're also great to be able to jump back into, because you will receive a lot of information and huge energy downloads and shifts. So it's really good to go back in and revisit and just kind of connect back in, just in case you've missed anything or you want a teaching to go a bit deeper. And I found that is very helpful.
Absolutely. That's really good to know as well. So if you have a really packed day, one of those days over the event weekend, don't worry about it. You can tune in later because these will all be recorded. And the energy will still be there, like Julie was saying. You're not going to miss out on the energy or the amazing downloads that are coming through, even if you can't make it live. So don't worry if that's the case. Still register. It's still worth it. Awesome. And Julie, this is really exciting because you are one of the 13 speakers for this event that Lisa is hosting. And I feel like your topic is extremely important and useful. So would you mind just explaining to us what's your topic and what are you most excited about it?
Yeah, my topic, it feels really timely because of what's happening in the world, because we're really in this phase of massive uncertainty, massive, periods of having to sort of reframe and reorient ourselves in terms of how we present. And because of that, my theme landed a few weeks ago, and that is your lineage does not limit you. And the reason I feel this is really important to look at is because unless we examine our motivations, unless we examine the old stories, the narratives, the conditioning that we have so easily inherited from our parents and also from their lineage, then it's easy to go through life in a way that is unconscious, and we're hypnotized into believing, what we were taught when we were kids still holds true. And of course, none of that is true at all. So I'm going to be presenting very simple techniques and practices that allow those who engage to look at, what the old narratives are, and if they still hold sway and if they still have energy in one's life today. Because, if we don't look, if we don't investigate, if we don't question what we've inherited and essentially swallowed whole, then we won't live true to ourselves. We won't be living in an authentic way. We'll be in a sort of half embrace with our own lives and completely missing our call to action and living in a way that isn't authentic to our purpose. So those are the things that we'll be investigating and having some fun with as well, because obviously not everything we've inherited is negative or contracting. A lot of the things that we've learned from our families, both from the female side and the male side, have a lot of positives, and oftentimes too those things can go unexamined. And you start looking at maybe your grandfather or your great-grandfather and way back, you might realize, wow, some of these characters that were tremendously gifted and did incredibly brave things. And we've only kind of half examined that, not really taken that on, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, there is, just like there might be some painful things that we need to clear from our lineage, some trauma and whatnot. There, like you said, there are also beautiful things that we've inherited from our ancestors. So it's not all or nothing. There's a lot of good. And I think that we can take comfort in the fact that we were placed in the line, or, you know, the lineage that we were placed in for a reason. And Julie, what does an increased spiritual awareness, or what effect does an increased spiritual awareness have in maybe us or one individual being that shift in maybe a generational line that's had some sort of trauma, depression, something that needs to be switched and made positive? What does that spiritual awareness do, and how does that empower the individual to actually make that change?
Well, I can speak really simply and directly to that fantastic question, because I was taught when, you know, I've spoken about having had a radical awakening in 1989, and literally, and you know, it was really outside of my culture and direct experience growing up, but I was thrown into this world of, you know, energy and of light and movement and shape shifting and lucid dreaming and, you know, heightened clairvoyance, clairaudience, and all of those things. And one of the master yogis who trained me said something so compelling way back in 1989, and that is, when you receive Shaktipat, which is what I was given, which is the awakening of the spiritual energy, or when you have an awakening, whether it's subtle or dramatic, it affects your lineage going back 6 or 7 generations.
Whoa. Okay. Wow.
And we feel it. You feel it because you're so changed. An awakening completely transforms everything. It heals, you know, these old knots, the old samskaras, the yogis call them the samskaras, the seeds of karma. It essentially washes those and sort of unravels those. It heals pain and suffering. It doesn't take everything away, mind you, but it has a huge effect. And there are kind of more subtle components that we're left to work with, because that's our call to action, to heal these more subtle chords. And the work we do on ourselves obviously impacts, you know, our lineage going back 7 generations. And it really, you know, and understanding the truth of these words, because shortly after I received this radical awakening and I started doing the work of self-inquiry, and I was doing the practices of meditation and mantra repetition and prayer work and all of those things, I was often told to focus on a family member who lived in the UK.
Interesting.
And, you know, at the other side of the world. And I never spoke to him or her about what I was doing, but I would do the work. And then the next time I would go to see them, their situation would have changed, or the issue that was difficult in their lives had been resolved. So I saw evidence of that work myself through the simple practices that I was told to do. And this is the nature of energy. This is the nature of what happens. It's an alchemical process of activation that starts to happen in your life, and it obviously has a very far-reaching effect with respect to your family members, your friends, your co-workers, and essentially the entire planet. So that's why, you know, when you wake up, it's not an individual experience. It's a global event.
Wow. I really like that. That's beautifully said. I think family dynamics, even if we're not actually conscious of them as we're awakening and going through this awakening process, can be really, really interesting and oftentimes quite complex. So if someone listening to this feels like, okay, I think I was placed in my family line, in my specific family line for a reason, I think I meant to shake things up, what would you say to them in regards to maybe there being some family members who aren't happy about their spiritual awakening? Because I think a lot of people experience that, but I feel like there is something that we could tell them or maybe discuss, just to encourage them in the sense that even if your family members aren't happy in some way, maybe if only at soul level, there is this sense of knowing that, and even gratitude at what that person is doing.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is a fantastic question and a fantastic theme, because it does come up a lot.
It does. Yeah.
And so, and that was certainly true in my case. Of course, what happens is you have a radical awakening and you want to tell the world about it because you've seen the benefits of it and you feel it, and you can, it's like night and day. And so there's an enthusiasm behind the energy that you feel, that you really want to share with people to help them feel better, for want of a better turn of phrase. But you have to be mindful about where that person is at. And one of the best pieces of advice I was given again by a master yogi is to choose my words carefully and make sure the language I'm using is inclusive. Because, for example, if you're speaking to a born-again Christian or an Orthodox Christian, and you're suddenly talking about chakras and Shaktipat and goodness knows what, you'll do more harm than good, because you'll turn them away and you'll create this divide between you. However, if you use language such as, Jesus and Christ told me to say this, or I had a message from, I had a feeling of Jesus in my spirit, or my spirit told me to say this to you, then there's no division at all. There's no obstacle that is suddenly created and is in the way of this transmission of grace. And so language, the right use of language is really important. And also, of course, honoring and knowing when it's time to be quiet and say nothing, and when there's an opportunity to speak. Because again, if you force your beliefs or something that you've heard or intuitive onto someone and he or she is not ready, again, you do more harm than good. So it's actually best to be quiet. And quite honestly as well, what happens is your state does the work, even though you haven't to say anything. So again, it's about being mindful and being respectful. And everything then just works out beautifully if you remember those very simple things. Use of language and is it the right time and is it the right space to be sharing?
That makes a lot of sense, yeah. Everything, I think with this subject, things are oftentimes contextual, and things, a lot of it just has to do with timing, I think. And it's really interesting, Julie. I don't know that if you've noticed this at all, but I feel like sometimes when souls incarnate on Earth, a lot of times, I think we get used to things being difficult. And I think sometimes in certain individuals, I think there's this resistance to change, even if they don't like where they are at all, even if things are actually pretty miserable. And I think sometimes there can be this friction if someone sees that a member of their family is leaving that paradigm, because some people identify so strongly with life, with believing that life is meant to be hard, life is meant to be difficult. God is a very judgmental, strict, harsh dictator. Yes. So I think that that's another source for friction, is that some people think that life is supposed to be that way, and they maybe even take pride in it being that way, which is kind of interesting. But I think that can make it difficult for people who see that there's a different way, an easier way.
Yes, absolutely. And that really what is inherent in what you just said is that there's a comfort in not making a change, because it can be a little bit scary to take a leap of faith or to hold true to what you know in your heart feels like the right thing for you, especially if you feel like you're going against the grain, so to speak. But what happens is, and I can quote my father as a fantastic example of what we've been saying, because his kind of mantra was always, it's hard to make a decent living. And so what happened is that held true. It was hard for him to make a decent living. And I remember when I was very young, hearing that repeatedly, and there was something in me that really rebelled, because I knew deep in that it wasn't true, it wasn't authentic. But at the same time, I honored the place from which he was coming, because I knew that he'd inherited that from his father, and that it was hard for him to make a change. And he didn't know how to, back in, those days, there wasn't the wealth of information and resources that we have today with respect to mindset and what energy is and beliefs and conditioning and all of those things, and looking at the shadow. So, I had empathy and compassion for him, and I did try in my own way to speak to him in language that he could accept. But it was difficult. But thankfully we've moved out of that kind of time period, and we're definitely in a much more expansive, abundantly rich time period where we're realizing that energy is moving. Consciousness itself is who and what we are,
right?
And it's important to really be mindful of what we think and what we say and how we present and what our intentions are.
Absolutely. A lot of it is intention, I think, definitely. And doing everything from a place of love, and realizing if that's where someone is, there's no judgment there. There's nothing wrong with that. It just is where they are. But if from a greater multidimensional soul level, you were placed in a certain family in order to break some chains and in order to mix things up, then that's ultimately really beautiful too. And I'm glad that is possible.
Yes.
What would you say, Julie, if someone is born into a family and maybe they're doing lots of spiritual work and they're clearing things from the past and clearing things from their ancestors, with that person's effort to make those changes, what is it like for the incoming souls after that person does all of that work? How are things different for those souls that are born into that family as opposed to, 20 years prior? What are the things that are freed up for them, if that makes sense?
Well, I mean, you just said it, because what happens is they come in with a lot less weight, in their field, in their energy field, that they then have to sort of move through. And we're certainly seeing it with respect to young kids and young teens now. They're much more vocal about what feels right for them. They're much more open about, not wanting to judge other people and not feeling comfortable if they feel like they're being judged. So there's this new language that's been coming in that young people are using with respect to, protecting their space, honoring what they're feeling, and being very, very much more open about their perceptions than, young people were back in the 50s or 60s or even the 70s and 80s. So from that perspective, it's really encouraging, I have to say, and I'm really inspired by what I hear them speaking about, because they'll talk about dreams and visions and having a sense of things and being able to think outside the box. And these really are hallmarks of the what you want to call them, star seed children. I don't use the term indigo anymore, because I think that's a bit of
yeah, I know what you mean.
But I would say they're much more aware of their own light. Is the best way of putting it, and not afraid to state their needs either.
Yes, definitely. There is a healthy assertiveness, I think, that you can kind of notice. They're not afraid to speak their mind, and because of souls that have come in before them, and a lot of grace, honestly, that's possible. It's possible for there to be souls that can incarnate and be able to express themselves, and, like you said, be aware of their own light. I really like how you worded that. One thing that I'd really like your take on, Julie, is kind of balancing maybe a tendency to completely disown your earthly identity with the need to acknowledge that somewhat in order to look at your family circumstances, in order to do the work and clear your history. Because I think I don't know if the right way to describe it is spiritual bypassing, but what I'm trying to describe when maybe we realize that we are only the self and we let go of our story, which is absolutely part of enlightenment. But with that, how do we strike the balance between also acknowledging the circumstances of our birth and maybe the purposeful circumstances of our birth so that we can make a difference? I don't know. Does that...
Yes, of course, because look,
Yeah.
it's ridiculous. And I've spoken about this and written about this in some of the books. But you see a lot of that in spiritual communities with what I would call immature seekers who really try to do as many practices as possible as a way of denying their pain or stuffing down their pain or medicating their pain, rather than including that. And this is why shadow work is so essential, actually, because you can never attain enlightenment or self-realization, whatever you want to call it, if you have not included your own humanity, if you haven't looked at your conditions and patterns, if you haven't looked at where you resist life and where you deny yourself. So, all of that is vital to the process of waking up to the fullness of who you are, which includes everything. It includes you and your physiology and your humanity and all of those things. And it also respects and honors your lineage and your family, both past, present, and to come. So, everything is included because everything is the self, everything is consciousness. And when you start to really recognize and honor every aspect of that, then there's great freedom.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. I like too, Julie. I like the title of the topic of your the title of your talk for this upcoming event. Your lineage does not limit you. And with that, to me, comes this recognition that if someone were to maybe become more spiritually aware and kind of acknowledge some of the, crappy stuff that they're dealing with, whether those are emotions or whatever, there might be this tendency to even want to blame family members. Oh, well, my mother was like this and now I'm stuck with it. Or, this has been in my family for years. Why has no one, tried to help with this or done anything about it? So how can individuals maybe feeling that way or kind of realizing, oh my gosh, I'm dealing with this and it's not even my fault. How can they come to terms with that in a way that evokes more responsibility, even empowerment, rather than blame? Because if we're going to stick with blame, then that's just buying into the third dimensional paradigm all over again, right?
Sure. Again, that's an absolutely fantastic question. So first and foremost, what I would say is be honest. Take an honest inventory. So if you're really angry and upset and pissed off, for want of a better phrase,
yeah.
mother or your father or your family's circumstances or whatever, then honor that. That's what's coming up. That is what you're feeling in that moment, or in that week, or in that year, or whatever. just don't drop anchor there, because and this is why oftentimes long-term therapy goes on as long as it does, because clients will sit with therapists and just keep regurgitating the same bull. I don't want to say bull crap, but the same stuff,
exactly.
to speak, with respect to what their mother or their father did to them. So there will be a period when you feel angry, maybe really just so angry you can't even speak, and instead of trying to manage or placate it or medicate it through doing the practices and say to yourself, I shouldn't be feeling that, it's not spiritual, that isn't going to do anything. It'll just make it worse, actually. So,
yeah,
because
for sure.
Because the more you shine on it, the darker the shadow will become, because the more you'll pull away from it and try and put it behind you, and that doesn't work. It's not healthy. It's dysfunctional. So at least honor the fact and be honest with yourself and say, this feels shitty. I'm really upset with the way my mother was with me, or my father, or both, or whatever. Sort of work through that for as long as you need to, in terms of looking at what that was, and what you are handed, but take responsibility for then looking at the lessons you've learned, and were there any positives in that seeming negative experience or that negative phase of your upbringing? Because if you can do that, you're transforming it. And this is what the alchemists speak of. They speak of transforming base metal into gold, and that's what you're doing when you are meeting and greeting that anger that you might feel, and looking for the jewels or the gold inherent in that painful situation. And of course, to create any amazing jewel or gem, it has to go through a process of burning. And that's what happens when we feel terrible, and you feel you just can't do it, and it's too painful, and no.
Yeah, definitely. I couldn't agree more. And one thing that also came into me is actually, if you want to look at it this way, maybe that anger that you might feel is actually good, because what it is really signifying is that you're spiritually aware enough to know that that's not okay. Yes. Because some people go throughout their whole life just being even blinded or numbed because of what they're going through, and nothing shifts in them enough to make them angry enough to want to change or to realize that that situation isn't okay. So if you are feeling angry, good. That means that you are not okay with how things are and that you want to make a change. So in that sense, I think that there's, kind of sounds funny, but maybe there's even a little bit of gratitude to be had that you actually can see that something's not right.
Yes, look, and there's several things coming out of that as well that are really pointing to. You have to be awake to a certain level to be able to even see that, and that those patterns and conditioning in your family, and then have the courage to want to meet and greet it and work with it rather than running away from it. And the reason it often feels so big and so heavy and so dense and so just awful is because it's not just yours. You're also working with the inherited conditioning of your mother. If it was your mother that was really sort of hurtful towards you, for example, or sarcastic or critical or whatever, you're working with the energy and the patterns that she swallowed and inherited from her mother. So again, you're doing the work to change the whole lineage, going back as far as who knows when that first started. So it is big work, and it can feel overwhelming, but it's a complete game changer. Because it doesn't just affect you, it affects your mother and your mother's mother. Because if that, let's say a habit of sarcasm, for example, or being very critical, if you work on that energy to heal that and transform that within you, then you've also transformed it within your mother and your grandmother and your great-grandmother and so on and so forth. And this is why it's so important.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why it's also so worth it, because it's not just for you, it's for many, many souls. And this is going to help everyone in their next phase of evolution have a clearer way. And I'm sure that even for the ones that are coming in to make those shifts, we've all had help like that before. Yeah. We've all had a mother and a grandmother and a great-grandmother who has, done work to help us in some way. So we're all just really interconnected and doing this work together. So I don't know. It's, yeah.
Yeah, although what's happening now is it's much more heightened. It's the time is completely finished with respect to denying who we are, denying what we know as wise women, hiding our gifts away. That time is really, it's done.
Yeah. Thankfully, right?
Yeah, thankfully. So, the call to action is just to clean up kind of the residue of what's kind of left, so to speak, through the lineage, and make sure that you're doing the work on yourself and not kind of giving up when the going gets tough.
For sure. And kind of like you were saying, because it does affect, those other generations, you take it personally in the sense that there's a responsibility of seeing things through, but at the same time, it might not even all be yours. So you don't need to take it personally to the extent that you start blaming yourself, right? It's just
Right.
all about awareness. And if you're aware that, if it helps, you can look at it as just a problem that the whole planet is facing, not even your whole family. If your mother, was harsh on you or critical to you, well, that's maybe a problem that many, many people on Earth are experiencing. So if you can look at it from a higher level, I think, then you don't have to even take it as personally on yourself or be as hard on yourself too, I think.
Yes, and what happens is after an awakening, whether it's subtle or dramatic, everything does feel less personal. I mean, I'm not saying there isn't a personal aspect in there, because it can be felt, but it is much more impersonal. And so the work becomes easier, because the reason is that you realize that you're not the narrative, or you're not the story. There's a bigger awareness that wakes up to itself. The self awakens to the self, is what the yogis say, which is prior to the story. Right. And so when you are doing self-inquiry from that state of awareness, then, everything to do with the narrative and the personal I, the small I, doesn't have the same impact. It's much more softened.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. That's absolutely true. Also, Julie, I don't know what your thoughts are on this, but I'm kind of curious, just because it's actually really relevant to even the work I'm doing right now in terms of my own lineage. We were talking a lot about how we can transform our emotions, or maybe some of the human patterns or habits we have in terms of where we come from and our ancestors. How does this affect the biological DNA? So if we're just working on emotions, how does this actually transform even the cells in our body, or how can we bring that about? That makes sense.
Again, that's a fantastic question, because, and again, I keep referring to the yogis because I've learned so much from the master yogis. But the way they put it is that when you do the inner work, and you do the work of self-inquiry after having an awakening, then the darkness that is within you becomes transformed into light, and so the light body becomes more illumined. And then it has, and of course we're taught. I was taught this at Catholic school, actually. Saints always had a halo.
Yeah.
And it's really a great way of expressing what you feel when you're in the presence of a great being, because there's no question that energy field it feels massive, and it feels so vibrant, and at the same time tremendously still. There's not even the slightest ripple, because they are absolutely established in source itself, and it's felt. You really feel it. You feel them coming from a long way away, and that's certainly been my direct experience when I've had lucid dreams with great beings, and also when I've met great beings in person. So what happens is, not only does your emotional, psychological, and your physiological state change, the subtle body changes, and everything is illumined. And that's why when you are in the physical presence of a great being, they look so youthful, they look so radiant, even if they're advanced in age. There's a light that pours out of them that is timeless, and you feel it.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I think everything is related and interconnected, and as I've done some inner work myself and let go of old beliefs or old paradigms that you learn growing up, in church or something, I've had to let go a lot of those things. It's interesting too what work there is to be done on the physical body as it's taken the brunt of some of those beliefs. Because if we tell ourselves, that we don't love ourselves or something, the cells of our body are picking up on that. So that's something that needs to be healed as well. And I've even just been shocked at the hold that some of these, institutions and religions want to have, not only on our mindset or our beliefs, but also literally on our physical DNA. So I've had to even, work with my own higher self and ask that those imprints be removed as well, because essentially there are, I don't know what you could call it, a lot of things, paradigms or programs that are reinforced in us so that we can't ascend, so that we can't evolve from this planet. But the more, like we've been talking about, you do the work emotionally, that's going to free up your physicality and enable your higher self to come in and also do the work on your DNA as well, so that you can draw closer to that goal of Christ consciousness that we all have the capacity to achieve, like those great yogis that you mentioned.
Yes. Well, look, and the thing that I often speak about and teach is the importance of connecting in with your physical body. So if you have an ailment, for example, and this is such a simple practice, if you have a headache or a toothache or earache or backache or whatever it is, you go directly to it and you have a conversation with it. You meet it, you greet it, and you say, what are you here to show me? What must I learn? What is this gift? What are you presenting? And do some journaling around that. And the more you do that, the more your own body can speak to you, because the body is innocent. The body just responds with respect to, what is happening in the mind and the emotions, and where we're resisting life or what not wanting something to happen, it's happening. So all these things show up in the bodies. But if you can get into the habit of having a direct conversation with your body when there's an ailment or when there's a condition that is uncomfortable or painful, then you can at least meet it and work with it energetically before taking the next step, which might be to go and see a doctor and get some medication for whatever's ailing you.
I really like that teaching that we can create a dialogue with our body. There can be a communication with our body, and our body, like, I totally agree that our body is innocent. It's leading from our mind. It doesn't have a mind of its own, right? But I really like that, just incorporating the body into the healing, into our growth, because I think that there's so many messages there. And I feel like you would probably agree with this, that the body is meant to be a reflection of our spiritual growth, right? If it's the temple for our spirit, every wonderful truth that you've learned, every ounce of love that you've let into your mind and heart can be reflected in our body, I think, too.
Yes, and the way you move. One of the master yogis said to me many, many years ago, when you walk into a room, your presence should have the power to create stillness. And that's what happens when a great being walks into the room. You can just feel this silence just descends, and it's just beyond words.
Oh yeah.
And and again, we know this is true. Again, I'm standing behind my own words, because with any one of us, if you're running around, your head's just going crazy, in your mind, you're going crazy, you're all upset, and your breath is, short, you're breathing quickly, and your heart's racing, and that has an effect on everybody. Everybody can feel it. Whereas when you're calm, you're centered, you're moving appropriately, and it doesn't mean to say you have to move like a snail, but you're moving.
True. Yeah.
That can be felt as well. And I give you an example. A few weeks ago, I was walking, along the path ahead of someone who was following me a few footsteps behind, and she just kind of caught up with me, and she said, I want to be able to walk like you. I said to her, how so? And she said, you walk with such elegance. You have such a flow. And I said, thank you.
Wow.
You too. And then we just walked together, and I could feel her whole state was just kind of calming down. And what happened was, she just came out of the mind and settled into her heart, and she was just moving in a peaceful way. And we all have the capacity to be able to bring that peace, wherever we are, and whatever we're doing.
That's beautiful, Julie, and just another testament to the impact we can have on those around us when we are doing our best to be in our heart and not our mind, to overcome the mind and do, whatever work is required in order for that to happen, because you made such a beautiful impact on that woman's day and even her life just by your essence and your energy. And so I think that that's just a beautiful example of the goodness that can come from being more spiritually aware, even in that simple way.
Yes, just simple. You know, and I wouldn't even call it a spiritually aware kind of. It's just being in the flow of your own life, moving in a way, you know. And I was just looking at the sky, and just the breeze was blowing, and it was a beautiful day, and I was just enjoying the stillness and looking from a place of stillness. And of course, she could feel that, and she tried to put it in her own words. You know,
I'm glad you said that, because it's even simpler than the way I said it. In truth, it's even simpler than that. It's just being, right?
Yes, it's just being. It's not you know, spiritual or worldly, because there's only the one self. You know, we use that language.
Yeah.
And the way we kind of have to use the language to be able to speak to what we're speaking to. But essentially, it's just life itself, or source itself, or the supreme self moving through life as you, and as, you know, everyone and everything that appears in your life, and is teaching you and gifting you with something. And likewise, you're teaching and gifting too. So there's always this exchange happening.
Absolutely. Well, Julie, thank you so much for giving us some more information and background about the topic for your event. I'm really, really excited to hear your talk. And like you said, this really is a timely topic. And I think for a lot of souls, or people who just want more context as to what they're going through, maybe why they're going through that, I think that this is going to be a real source of comfort and information for them. So thank you so much. And for all those wanting to sign up for the Quantum Feminine event, we will put all of the information in the show notes, but you can also just head to lisamgunshore.com and find the registration form there as well. So we're looking forward to having you all there. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Maddie, and thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Julie.
Thank
Thanks
you.
so much.